back to, the strategy to try to either defeat ISIS in Iraq and Syria, but also, what is the most effective way to stabilize Iraq at this point? What are your thoughts with regard to that strategy?
Well, the only way that what remains of Iraq now is partitioned. Let's face it, Kurdistan is not subject to the direction of Baghdad, has not been for quite some time. That is, the northern Kurdish region of Iraq is becoming an independent state in its own right. It is linked to the Kurds in Syria, who are also taking their own course, apart from Damascus and apart from anybody else. The jihadistan that calls itself the Islamic State is yet another polity which straddles the Syrian and Iraqi border, and which is the size of Britain. This is not a small area, and it is one of the cradles of human civilization. It is not insignificant in its own right. The rest of Iraq, that which is under the control nominally of Baghdad, is itself divided. So the first question is, can the government in Baghdad get its act together? Mm-hmm. And so far, the answer is it has not. One can hope that it will, but that's the prerequisite for doing anything in what remains of Iraq. I think overall, however, we're looking at the unraveling of the post-World War I Sykes-Picot order in the region, and Iraq and Syria are probably not the end of that process.
So you see pretty much an unraveling of those borders?
I think countries like Lebanon and Jordan are particularly vulnerable. I don't see, Lebanon, of course, is split along some of the same lines as Syria, and it has, in effect, a state within a state in areas that are administered and taken care of by Hezbollah. Jordan is an artificial buffer state. It exists because it's convenient to Israel, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Syria. Saudi Arabia is fine, but the others are all in great difficulty, and it's under huge pressure.
If this Prime Minister, the nominee for Prime Minister, Haider al-Abadi, in Iraq is able to form a new cabinet, if in fact Mr. Maliki is able to or step aside, do you see a way where the previously alienated Sunni population, who are now to some extent allying themselves with ISIS because they are so angered by the Shiite-led government of Prime Minister Maliki, do you see a way that the Sunnis could abandon ISIS, ISIL, however you want to call them, and somehow you defeat them, as well as then recreate or have a more viable Iraqi state, even without the Kurdish north?
Well, that's really two questions, I think. On the question of Sunnis separating themselves from the Islamic State, that's entirely possible if the Islamic State overplays its hand, as many think it may do. Certainly, the majority of Sunnis in Iraq are not comfortable with the kind of barbaric extremism that the Islamic State represents. So the question then is, if they want to flee the Islamic State, if not physically, at least in terms of their orientation, where do they go? And that really, in many respects, takes us back to the question you asked before. Can the government in Baghdad get its act together? And that, in turn, depends really less on the United States than on Iran. Mm-hmm. Iran has withdrawn its support from Maliki and thrown its support behind Mr. al-Abadi. And that may be enough to produce some kind of reconciliation and union in the government-controlled part of Iraq. If so, then the Iranians have also been very much aware that Maliki has done nothing to conciliate the Sunnis and everything to alienate them. And they've been arguing all along, as we have in the United States, that the government in Baghdad needs to become inclusive rather than exclusive. So a combination of people being turned off by the Islamic State and Baghdad getting its act together would produce a new situation, but we're not there.